guys, and welcome back to Beauty in the Bookcase. So today I wanted to do something a little different. If you've seen tier lists on YouTube before, you know what they are. They're just kind of like these lists where you rank the top whatever. You know, I've seen like ranking YouTubers, ranking YouTuber apologies, ranking games, food, whatever. So I went ahead and made my own tier list. I'm going to link it down in the description if you guys want to go ahead and do it yourself. And you can definitely tag me on Instagram or put it on my Facebook or my Twitter. You can go ahead and send it to me. It'd be really fun to compare the list that you guys eventually get with my own list. So yeah, what we're going to do is I took 50. So I found a list of 100 of the best first opening lines in novels. I split it in half. We are gonna have to split that half into another half, so it's gonna be 4 different parts. So it's gonna be the first 25 books. We're gonna go through the lines. I'm gonna do my makeup while we talk about them. I'm gonna tell you why I'm ranking them and kind of like what my system is. So yeah, let's get started. So to kick it off, we have Herman Melville's Moby Dick. The first line is, "Call me Ishmael." Now, okay, firstly, I just want to say I'm not trying to pass any type of judgment on these writers. They're all obviously, you know, world famous and classic authors for a reason. But really, I'm just going to be treating it as I would if I were to pick up a book for the first time, or you know, if I was in a bookstore just browsing and I grabbed a book, and if that was the first line I read, you know, it doesn't tell me anything about the book. And obviously, yeah, we all know the story of Moby Dick, but from that first line, you know, I don't feel any interest in reading on. It doesn't tell me anything about the story. It doesn't really set a scene for me or anything. So I probably have to go ahead and rate Moby Dick down. Oh god. For now, I'm gonna place Moby Dick in the D tier. So next up we have Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I would say this is probably one of the most iconic lines in literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. I definitely think that's a good line. I think, again, it sets us into the setting, just because, you know, at least we know if we're talking about a man with a good fortune, there's going to be aristocracy. If it's in search of a wife, we know there's going to be some type of romance, and we have kind of that intrigue of, well, is it going to be kind of like a marriage out of convenience? Is it going to be a marriage out of love? Are they going to be like star-crossed lovers? I've read Pride and Prejudice, so obviously I know what happens. But I think it does do a really, really good job of putting us right in there. So I would say Pride and Prejudice would go, right now I'm gonna hold off on like the top. Like I said, I'll redo this in the end. So for now, we're just gonna stick to A through D. So I would say if I just read the first line of Pride and Prejudice, I definitely would want to read on. So A tier. Next up, next contender is Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. A screaming comes across the sky. So I've never read that book. However, coincidentally, when I was in my undergrad, I wrote a poem that starts with the phrase "a scream across the sky." And I had this mug. Unfortunately, it broke in one of my many moves. But it was like the best first lines in literature, and that was one of them. And yeah, I just thought it was kind of an interesting coincidence that without ever reading that line, you know, we had the same artistic decisions. So, you know, I'm not saying I'm great, I'm just saying I'm in sync. I'm kidding. Yeah, so interest level, this might just be biased because, like I said, I incidentally wrote quite a similar line. However, I think there's definitely an intrigue in there, right? It has kind of like, it's quite short, like the Herman Melville but I think it tells us something, because it already draws you in, instead of just being kind of like, okay, here's a name of a character you don't know and that doesn't say anything about the story. We're already kind of like, well, you know, is it a fearful scream? Is it kind of like coming from an animal? Is it from a person? Is it like violence based? Is it like a revolution? Is it sadness, anguish? You know, you kind of already get a sense of emotions, and you get dropped into a very, you know, there's a scenario, right? You're already kind of at least getting into the idea that you're being dropped in the action. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm gonna put it alongside our girl Jane Austen. Next contender. Up next we have 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I don't know that I've talked about this before. Actually, I did my master's in translation studies, and I specifically studied the work of Gabriel Garcia Marquez in translation. So Gregory Rabassa, who is the person who translated his works, and we go way back. We're super close. In translation, it says, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aurelio Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover the ice. There is definitely something that gets lost in translation. Like I said, it's outside of the translator's control, and I know Garcia Marquez himself said he was really, really proud of the work that Rabassa had done for him, so who am I to criticize? Even though I did spend like the entire time criticizing him, until my advisor had a little chat with me and was like, try to be less critical. Remember that you're talking about the process and not the quality. You're not quality assessing this. So overall, it's kind of hard, because I'm not gonna have the original lines for other pieces that were written in other languages, I don't want to judge it based off of the original. So I guess we're going off of the translation. I think this kind of does a combination of what Austen does and what Pynchon did. It throws you into the action, right? Because we're finding out we're in front of a firing squad. So we're like, how did we get here? You know, we're having one of those Saved by the Bell moments where Zach would turn to the camera and be like, I bet you're wondering how we got here. So yeah, I think it definitely does a great job of kind of drawing you, being like, why are we in front of the firing squad? What happened? Where are we? And then kind of like having that memory of the father, sort of taking us back to something so innocent. And then the idea of discovering the ice, right? It's quite poetic. It's very pretty. It kind of maintains that kind of beauty and poetry that Garcia Marquez was so good at portraying. And then it kind of has that, that impact of boom, here's the action. So Garcia Marquez, where do I want to put you? It's hard because I'm so biased because I love him so much, even though that book is so strange. I might make a video. Let me know in the comments if you want to see a video on it. That book is just very strange. I don't want to put everything in A, but I'm going to put it in A for now, and then we'll rethink. Next one is Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. Controversial book. As you know, if you've seen my other videos, I have a love affair with Russian authors. I'm obsessed with them. I think everything they do is brilliant, and I wanted to be an old Russian guy. That's what my dream in life is, to be an old Russian guy. No, but in all seriousness, I've read Lolita. I've read a lot of the work of Russian authors. I think they do some really interesting things. I think they're really, really good at setting the scene, kind of like as I was just talking about Garcia Marquez. I love that feeling of being transported somewhere. The first line is, Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. What a line. I don't, as much as I do enjoy that book, I think it's, I mean, as questionable as it is, I don't think that's one of those lines that if you're not familiar with what the novel is about, or even if you're kind of on the fence about it, because it's kind of like, if you don't know, it's about an older man falling in love with like a child. If I read that first line, I wouldn't be hooked. I wouldn't be like, okay, I want to commit myself to reading however many pages of this book. I think it kind of has the same energy as the Herman Melville. It's kind of introducing a character, but not really telling us much of anything other than, you know, there's a bit of a love story going on, and something clearly quite sexual. So, I feel like if I put Herman Melville in the D, I have to put, don't take that the wrong way. In this tier, in the final tier, I guess I'll have to put Lolita there as well. I haven't read Moby Dick, like I said, but I have read Lolita, and I like it, but that opening line doesn't get me the way that I feel it should. Next. Anna Karenina, speaking of the Russians, Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, translated by Constance Garnett. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So this one's interesting because it has kind of like that vagueness of the Lolita and Moby Dick, but it still has some intrigue, and it still kind of does a better job of setting up plot, setting up characters. You know, we're already getting into the idea that we're gonna have a family. There's gonna be kind of like some family issues, some family drama, and it's probably gonna be quite sad. Although, well, if you've ever read a Russian novel, they're all pretty sad. So that's not anything surprising. So I don't think it's as effective as Jane Austen or Garcia Marquez or Thomas Pynchon, but I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But I think it's still way more effective than the other two. So I would say I'd probably put that on a C. Again, I think because it's such a famous book, we're more inclined to read it. However, if we pick that up and just read it at like a bookstore, I don't know that I'd be 100% inclined to pick it up and take it home with me. So James Joyce, speaking of Ireland, James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. I haven't read that one. I've read part of Ulysses and Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. So River Run past Even Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious what? I don't know how to pronounce that word, so I'm just gonna put it right here and you can insert it yourself. Of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. Dense as usual. I'd expect nothing less from Mr. James Joyce. This one is tricky because it's very beautiful. I think it's quite poetic and, you know, kind of pretentious. That's James Joyce for you, and I love him for it. But I feel like I could read that in a poem and not need additional context. So I could read that line right now and I don't feel that I'm missing anything. I don't feel like I need to read on to discover some grand adventure. So because of that, I think I'm gonna put it with Anna Karenina. Interesting, but not, you know, complex enough. Not something that I feel I need however long. Finnegan's Wake is a huge book too, so. Next contestant, George Orwell's 1984. It was a bright I can read. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Okay, interesting, because halfway through that first sentence, I was like, okay, whatever. Not impressive. But then you have that the clock struck 13, which does catch your attention. I mean, I guess if you're European, or you know, do military time, I guess it wouldn't be incredibly bizarre for like a digital clock to strike 13, but an analog, do I know what I'm talking about? It would be kind of normal for a like our phone or our computer to strike 13. However, for our you know, a usual traditional clock to strike 13, that would obviously be pretty weird. I think that's something that was really clever, right? Starting it off with, yeah, you're setting the scene, it's a cold day, it's April, why should I care? Because the clock struck 13. So clearly, you know, we get that kind of like, every year this happened except for this one time, which is kind of quite a trope, but it's not so on the nose, and I think that's really, really, really clever. For that, I'm gonna put it in the B. I don't think it has quite the impact that the other three do, but I think it still kind of catches my attention, catches me off guard. Up next, Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, a classic. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. This one is also interesting because I think it kind of does the Anna Karenina and Finnegan's Wake thing where, it feels quite poetic and it makes sense on its own. It kind of has that contradictory element to it that draws you in. However, I think where it differs and where it really shines is that it's still creating that mystique and that intrigue, and I think that's kind of what sets it apart and what's helped it to stand out, right? Because it is this entire thing of contradictions. You know, how could it be the best and the worst of times? How could it be darkness and light and hope and despair? You know, it kind of has that intrigue of, but you know, things kind of being off and conflicting, and it draws you in. You want to know this world. So for that, I definitely have to put it in the A, I think. Invisible Man. I am an invisible man. That's the first sentence of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. This is a struggle. I've talked about this book before. I really love this book. I think this book is incredibly powerful. There's a line in there that says, I am invisible simply because people refuse to see me. And I think that would have been a brilliant first line as opposed to just, I am an invisible man. I think it kind of has some of that vagueness that I'm not loving. I think it kind of, I'm going to put it next to Orwell because, again, it has that same type of thing where it's kind of obvious, you know, kind of like whatever, commonplace, but then there was the intrigue of, well, do you mean literally invisible or metaphorically? So I think in that regard, it does better than the other four. Miss Lonely Hearts by Nathaniel West. I've actually never heard of this book. The Miss Lonely Hearts of the New York Post-Dispatch. Are you in trouble? Do you need advice? Write to Miss Lonely Hearts and she will help you. Sat at the desk and stared at a piece of white cardboard. I mean, I think there's a quirkiness to it that we haven't seen in other things. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a bit of intrigue in, like, what do they do? But at the same time, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. I think there is almost too much detail in that first line. I think we already know too much about what we're gonna talk about. I don't, you know, it reads more kind of like, almost like the blurb Just as a side note, whoever decided to move the blurbs from the back of the book to the inside of the book, I hate it. I still keep flipping books over and then having to be like, they're not there anymore, they're inside. And some don't have them. People, please put blurbs on your books. But anyway, that rant aside, I think I was interested for like a second, but would I go out and search for this book actively? I don't think so. I don't think it's the most captivating line. So I'm gonna have to put it with Lolita and Moby Dick. Who's next? Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain. Disclaimer, I don't like Mark Twain. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just the subject material that I didn't care for, or if it was more so just the dialect. I just found it so hard to get through. I think it was Huckleberry Finn that I tried to read and I couldn't. I can't with Mark Twain. Says, you don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But that ain't no matter. See, I already stumbled reading that first sentence. First of all, books like that, I mean, Ulysses, well, James Joyce did it in Ulysses, he had a lot of callbacks to The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, but it wasn't so, like, obvious. It wasn't so kind of like, there's like a story before this that you should have read, and if you haven't read it, it doesn't matter, but you still should have read my other book. I don't like it. I'm sorry. It's going to the D tier. I'm not even gonna waste time on it. Franz Kafka, The Trial, translated by Breon Mitchell. Someone must have slandered Joseph K. for one morning without having done anything truly wrong. He was arrested. That, again, that kind of has that impact. I want to know why he was arrested. I think it does something quite similar to the Garcia Marquez. And I think even while having a third person narrator, instead of, you know, having kind of like a bit of closeness, as being kind of like this person was going to go do this, it's still incredibly effective. That was so quick. That's the fastest decision I think I've made. Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. It says here, you are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel. I don't know if that was an error. I don't know if that was something the translator chose to do. The translator was William Weaver. But if that's the first line, I'm gonna go look it up real quick. It's like the Mark Twain, except even more on the nose. I don't see the point of it. I don't feel, you know, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, that's given me no information, and if I didn't know who you are, if I don't know anything about the plot of the story, why should I care that I'm about to read your new novel? You know, imagine if like a brand new author, like if I started my book being like, you're about to read Maria Cardona's first novel ever, are you ready? Like, I don't know, it's very gimmicky, and I think it lacks creativity. To be fair, this was written in actually it was written in 1979. Well, maybe the translation. I don't know when the original was written, because if it was written a long while ago, I guess you could say that. But even then, you know, we have Shakespeare, we have like Beowulf, and all these, you know, all the like Greek plays that have survived the age of time. And I've never seen something start kind of so, I don't know, bland. Samuel Beckett, my darling Samuel Beckett. I have not, this is from Murphy. I love Beckett. Waiting for Godot is apparently the most polarizing play ever, because people either love or hate it. You should watch my video on it. I'll link it up here somewhere. But Murphy, the first line is, the sun shone, having no alternative, on to nothing new. Okay, here's the thing. So having read Waiting for Godot, I'm very much inclined to be like, yeah, let's just give Beckett all the points because that's Beckett. You know, there's this kind of like depressing air of pessimism to Beckett that I find really interesting. However, if I had never read Waiting for Godot, if I knew nothing about Samuel Beckett, would I be inclined to read that book? Not really. So, as much as it pains me, Samuel Beckett, I'm gonna have to put you in the same place as Mark Twain, and that just doesn't feel right. Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born, what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied, and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't like going into it, if you want to know the truth. Okay. Interesting thing about this is that I feel like we get a lot of information without getting nothing at all, right? Our main character hasn't told us anything. They've actually said they don't want to talk about it. But, you know, we already have an idea of who his character is, right? His attitude. We already know that, you know, he didn't have a great childhood. He isn't, like, very touchy-feely. He's not interested in sort of, like, wasting time in introductions. So I think it's, yeah, I mean, again, I think it's something that could stand on its own. Like, I could read that out of context and not necessarily be drawn to it. So I am going to put it in that C tier. James Joyce, A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road. And this moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nice little boy named Baby Tuckoo. Look. James Joyce was an eccentric. He wrote things like that. I think, like with Beckett, I'm more inclined to be more lenient because I have read the portrait of an artist as a young man, and I did enjoy it. However, reading that tells me nothing. I would be inclined to think that I'm gonna read a fable or something. You're talking about a cow and like a baby. It's kind of random. It doesn't really set the scene. I will give it points for, you know, not being like, eventually, this is the preface to my, like, amazing, brilliant book, Ulysses, that I still haven't written. Still better than Mark Twain. But I'm going to have to put it on that same tier. And I'm sorry, James Joyce. Ford Maddox Ford, The Good Soldier. This is the saddest story I have ever heard. Okay, so that was written in 1915. I'm gonna give some, you know, leniency to, I don't know how, you know, well evolved our stories were at that point. However, I don't know. I think it's, you know, as writers, right, we're often told we have to show instead of tell. So if, you know, I think starting with something like The Chronicle of a Death Foretold, the first line in that is just kind of like, on the day he was to die, main character woke up at like 5 a.m. or something. That tells me, okay, well, this is going to be really sad. I mean, in case, you know, the title didn't give it away. But it's showing me, right? I mean, it is telling me straightforward, like, yeah, he's going to die. I don't know, I think it just does it much more effectively than just being kind of like, yeah, this is going to be a really sad story. You know, that's kind of like when somebody opens up a video being like, this is the hardest video I've ever had to film. We're like, okay, show me why. Don't just sit there and tell me. You know, actually show me something. It's kind of lazy. Not as lazy as Mark Twain. Yeah. Definitely not as lazy as that Italo Calvino one, but yeah, it's not very profound. Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy. I wish either my father or my mother, or indeed both of them, as they were in duty both equally bound to me, had minded what they were about when they begot me. Had they duly considered how much depended upon what they were then doing, that not only the production of a rational being was concerned in it, but that possibly the happy formation and temperature of his body, perhaps his genius, and the very cast of his mind, And for aught they knew to the contrary, even the fortunes of this whole house might take their turn from the humours and dispositions which were then uppermost. Had they duly weighed and considered all this, and proceeded accordingly, I am verily persuaded I should have made a quite different figure in the world from that in which the reader is likely to see me. Don't like the idea of breaking that third wall at the end. I think it's interesting, but I'm not persuaded to figure out what it's about. So I'm just gonna put it here in the C tier. Charles Dickens David Copperfield. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. Again, kind of telling instead of showing. However, I think there is a bit of complexity in it, in that at least we're getting this inner conflict, right? Of, am I going to be the hero? Is it going to be somebody else? Am I going to need saving? Are people going to need saving from me? Yeah, I think there's already a little bit of depth there. Not as good as Tale of Two Cities, but definitely a solid B tier for David Copperfield here. James Joyce's Ulysses. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead, bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. James Joyce. Your weird book. I don't care. You read that first page and you don't care. I think Ulysses is very clever. I understand what he was going for, but that book is really dense. And I haven't gotten all the way through it, but I did see it performed as a play in the Abbey Theatre. It was brilliant. I think it was definitely meant to be performed more so than read. However, that being said, I did remember a lot of what I read, so clearly there was some, at least subconscious interest. Paul Clifford by Edward George Bulwer Lytton. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals, when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets, for it is in London that our scene lies, rattling along the housetops and fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness. This was written in 1830. This is one of the oldest ones we've had, aside from the Tristram Shandy. I really like that. I think, again, if it was kind of, a modern day thing that started with, it was a dark and stormy night, I'd be like, whatever, cliche. However, I am in love with overly descriptive things, so I'm gonna put it in the B just because I don't, it's not top tier, but it's good. The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon again. One summer afternoon, Mrs. Oedipa Maas came home from a Tupperware party whose hostess had put perhaps too much kirsch in the fondue to find that she, Oedipa, had been named executor, or she was supposed executrix, of the state of one Pierce Inverarity, a California real estate mogul who had once lost $2 million in his spare time, but still had assets numerous and tangled enough to make his job of sorting it all out more than honorary. I literally had not heard of this man until today, but his two first lines, they got me hooked. I don't think it's quite as good as the first one that we had, but sorry, what was this? The Crying of Lot 49. Yeah, I don't think it's quite as good as the first one, but still quite effective. I want to know who both of these characters are. The Tupperware party clearly sets, a very specific time for us. What's going on with this Pierce guy. Very interesting. City of Glass, not the Cassandra Clare one. This is by Paul Auster. It was a wrong number that started it, the telephone ringing 3 times in the dead of night, and the voice on the other end asking for someone he was not. Ooh. I like kind of that idea of asking for someone he was not, because we don't know if by he was not he's referring to the person being called or the caller. Again, the dead of night, this ringing phone, the wrong number, it started it all. I think it definitely creates a lot of intrigue. Like, I'm curious. want to know. That's something that I'm immediately like, yes, tell me all about it right now. Last one. Okay, yeah, we're definitely gonna leave it at 25. This is William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. Through the fence, between the curling flower space, I could see them hiding. Interesting, because I want to know who you're seeing hiding, but overall, I'm not dying to know. Okay, so very quick recap of things that I would definitely put on this number one. Gotta give it to Austen. Gotta give it to Charles Dickens. I think the rest of these I'm going to keep together. I think they all kind of have that same thread of not giving too much but shoving us in the action in a very interesting way. Yeah, these guys are definitely, I think really those two were the only ones that I was going to move around. I felt I took forever making most of my decisions. So yeah, let me know if you guys agree with my decisions, if you disagree, or would you place different things, and we will do a part 2 sometime soon to go through the rest of these 25, and then eventually we'll do the other 25. So, you know, this will be a 4-part series. But yes, make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more videos like these. Let me know if you have any ideas down in the comments below, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you know exactly when I upload, and I will see you guys next time.